Welcome. My name is Margaret Borrelli, Minister of Faith Formation at Church of the Redeemer, United Church of Christ in Westlake, Ohio, and this is Praying at the Home Altar. It's a prayer break when we can come together during this time of uncertainty and sometimes anxiety. So to focus our prayers today, let me start with an excerpt from a prayer by John O'Donoghue, who's an Irish poet, author, and priest, and he entitled this, "For One Who is Exhausted, a Blessing." When the rhythm of the heart becomes hectic, time takes on the strain until it breaks. Then all the unattended stress falls in on the mind like an endless, increasing weight. The light in the mind becomes dim, and things you could take in your stride before now become laborsome events of will. Weariness invades your spirit, and gravity begins falling inside of you, dragging down every bone. Sounds like some of the Psalms we can read, but this excerpt is a pretty good snapshot of how we're feeling these days. I listened to a podcast by Brene Brown earlier this week. She's a researcher and author, and she became popular from her TED Talks. She started out by saying, I'm tired, and I see tired everywhere. She said that we're weary and worried, and there's no end date for this crisis. Normally, when we have a crisis, our adrenaline kicks in to give us some oomph to get through it. But during that time, we don't notice that our normal life has been ripped away, so that it's when the adrenaline surge ends, when the hurricane moves away or the flood waters recede, that it's then that the reality of loss of normal pulls the rug out from under us. Well, we knew pretty immediately that our normal had been lost. And with this pandemic, our adrenaline surge is ending, but the crisis isn't over, and we don't know when it will be, and normal isn't returning anytime soon. So what does this mean when it comes to prayer? I've heard from more than one person this week that it's been hard for them to pray. They are either too worried or too angry or too anxious. And sometimes we can do things like this prayer gathering, where we come together and pray with each other, but also in each other's stead. Brian McLaren, who describes himself as an author and contemplative activist, addresses this problem in the following way. He says, "Anxieties can gray the whole sky like cloud cover, or descend on our whole horizon like fog. But when we rename our anxieties, in a sense, we distill them into requests. So what covered the whole sky can now be contained in a couple of buckets. So when we're suffering from anxiety, we can pray simply by holding the word help before God. Help. Just letting that one word bring focus to the chaos of our racing thoughts. So let's try that right now as a prayer. Sit quietly, notice your breathing, take a deep couple of deep breaths. And then hold your hands in whatever prayerful way feels comfortable, maybe with palms up, resting on your lap, ready to receive. And then say to yourself and to God, help, help, help. And once we feel that our mind has dropped out of that frantic zone and into a spirit of connection with God, we might be able to let go of that word help and in its place hold a more specific word that speaks to what we need. It can then condense this cloud of vague anxiety into a bucket of substantial request. So think of a word that you might want to hold before God. It could be guidance or patience, courage or resilience, healing or peace. Choose your word and hold it before God in prayer as we sit in silence. Amen. I hope that you might be able to use this way of praying, certainly longer periods of time if you would like, as a conduit for calm in our days to come. I continue to read the prayers that Marin Tirabazi, a UCC minister, has been writing every day. And one of her recent ones reminds us that we can and should focus on the little things. And she calls this one Prayer of Little Things. God, I have only some little things in my prayers today. I folded the canvas bags that I used to bag my groceries and began to cry uncontrollably for all the good efforts I've ever made that have now been turned around. And then I walked the dog past the cemetery and I thought, those stones are too close. And I began to remember all the people who touched my life and from whom I now have so much distance. Joy too came in when a church admin I worked with last November staged a birthday drive-by with balloons out the sunroof and singing out the car windows. And suddenly the balloons stood for every joy I'd ever known and the gravestones for all my losses. And changing back to plastic bags for my bread and coffee and potatoes to keep us safe made me think of how many times we have not changed the world for the world's children. Then God said to me, parables, not just the vintage ones, but these found in a strange new normal of these stay-at-home days. We know the inside out of little things that flatten the curve between our hearts and hope. Amen. And it's this week Nadia Boltz-Weber who reminded me that we can pray for ourselves. This was her prayers for Sunday, March 29th, 2020. For the layers of comfort and convenience that surrounded our lives and that we never considered a blessing, but always just took for granted, forgive us. For we who must grieve in isolation and not in community, comfort us. For we who care for the sick, protect us. For the ability to turn off the fear-mongering and unhelpful commentary and worst-case scenario clickbait, strengthen us. For the times when we are all out of creative ideas for how to get through how to get through this with cooped-up kids, inspire us. For we who are now cutting our own bangs at home, guide us. For the grace to allow ourselves and others to just be less productive, shower us. For the generosity needed from those of us who have more resources, empower us. From our own selfish inclinations, deliver us. For just being your children, when none of us have done a global pandemic before, love us. For the days ahead, accompany us. God, unbound by time, help us to know that you are already present in the future we are fearing. Amen. Before I got tickled. Before I offer a final prayer of blessings, let me return to something that Brene Brown said in her podcast that I referenced earlier, because she speaks a real word of hope. She said that we can find a new way of thinking, and she's using a metaphor called settling the ball. Now, I've not heard it described that way before, but for anyone who's ever seen the littlest of their children or their grandchildren play soccer, you may have noticed that when they get the ball kicked to them mid-chest, they will try to bring their little legs almost up to their chins to try to kick that ball. But what they need to do, and what we need to do, is first learn how to settle the ball, to bring it down to our feet where it's manageable, so that then we can look out and get a read on the field and be strategic about where we want that ball to go next. And I think prayer helps us do that, to settle the ball. So now a word of blessing to send you on your way from Jan Richardson, artist and writer. She calls this blessing in the chaos. To all that is chaotic in you, let there come silence. Let there be a calming of the clamoring, a stilling of the voices that have laid their claim on you, that have made their home in you, that go with you even to the holy places, but will not let you rest, will not let you hear your life with wholeness or feel the grace that fashions you. Let what distracts you cease, and let what divides you cease. Let there come an end to what diminishes and demeans, and let depart all that keeps you in its cage. Let there be an opening into the quiet that lies beneath the chaos, where you find the peace that you did not think possible, and see what shimmers within the storm. Amen. May God go with you and keep you until we meet again, and I hope to see you next week when you will find me once again praying at the home altar. Be well.